6:29, just get me to 6:30, so I'm not accused of jumping the gun. I know that says after 6:30, but, yeah.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi, sorry.
You're not, you're right on time, actually. That clock is a little bit fast.
It was really slippery up there.
Good evening, everyone. It being 6:30 on tonight, Tuesday, January 12th, I'd like to call the Ordinance Committee to order. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, since the maker of the item order number 1 is on his way but not present in the room yet, I'd entertain a motion to go out of order and take up an item of the committee's choice.
I'd like to take a motion to take number 2 off the table.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so item 2 was filed by Counselor Bartley. Order that the city remove the no parking sign in front of 70 Chestnut Street, Whiting School.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as you know, this is now a residential residential building, and so there was a no parking for school.
Okay.
And so it's really superfluous, so I co-filed this with Gladys. She's good, the property owners are good, so there's really no need for the sign to be there. So I think we just should, I'm gonna make a motion to have the sign removed and delete whatever ordinance allowed that sign to be in place.
Any discussion? We have a motion on the table. Any other counselors? All in favor?
All right,
Aye.
I'll make a motion to take number 14 off the table.
Second.
All in favor?
All right,
Item 14 was filed by Counselor Bartley. Order that the city council order removal of the handicap parking sign at 5 to 7 Martin Street. The business at that address no longer requires it.
so there, yeah, that pretty much lays it out. So I'm gonna make a motion to have the handicap sign removed and have the ordinance allowing the handicap sign deleted.
Second.
Any discussion on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Madam Chair, can I take number 20 off the table?
All in favor?
All right,
Item 20, order that a handicap space be placed at 34 Congress Avenue for Joshua and Andujar.
motion to approve the order and allow and put up a handicap parking sign.
We have a recommendation from the Handicap Commission, the Commission on Disabilities, rather.
Let me check, because this is in order, but I haven't had a chance to look at every order.
Well, if we just get a second on that, I could discuss it.
All in favor?
Right. Just so under discussion, I did have a chance to speak with the chairman of the Handicap Commission, Disabilities Commission. He initially recommended that a sign not be placed there because there is off-street parking. But doing my diligence, which it's determined that the resident, who is a homeowner, has muscular dystrophy, and in speaking with him, Ryan met with him, but I've conferred with him on the phone at least a half dozen times. For him to access his house from his driveway as opposed to the street is much more difficult. Hence, he requested a sign, and when I explained that to the chair of the commission, he said, he didn't realize that. He said he would possibly review it, and this was about a month ago. I don't know if he's had the chance to review it, but he did remind me that the commission is a body that makes a recommendation. It doesn't compel us to do one thing or the other. And after I explained that to him, he said if this is your constituent, Counselor Bartley, and based upon those assertions you made, that he does have MD and that this is to help make his life a little bit easier, that he said it makes sense. Mr. Welch.
Okay, and I do have a little bit of information in the jacket to add. There is a note, after speaking with Counselor Bartley, it was explained that it's easier relative to your point that you just made, because of the slope of the driveway, and so they are recommending the parking space,
great.
1222.
Oh,
So
I
we're on
think
the same page.
Geez, I told the truth, how about that? Okay,
10 points.
yeah.
Okay,
Motion to receive and adopt the committee report from the Commission on Disabilities. Second.
all in favor?
All right,
Aye.
And we take up 16, 17, 18, and 19, which are also all handicap placards as a package. Second.
All in favor to take up those items?
all right.
And what were the numbers again, please?
16, 17, 18, and 19. So we already took care of 20.
Yes. Okay, so I'll read all these into the record. Number 16 is an order filed by Gladys LeBron Martinez, counselor. Order that a handicap sign be placed in front of 100 Beach Street for Philip Manzi. Item 17, filed by Counselor Valentin. Ordered that a handicap sign be placed in front of 195 Suffolk Street for Maria Vasquez. Number 18, ordered that a handicap sign be placed in front of 16 Clinton Street for Robert A. Fitzpatrick Jr., filed by Counselor Valentin. 19, filed by Counselor Soto, ordered that handicap sign be placed in front of 582 South Summer Street for Hector L. Velazquez. Let me see what I have.
And while you're looking at each of the orders, I would just motion that we move forward and adopt whatever the Commission on Disabilities has recommended, unless there's any other comments from counselors.
I don't see the recommending counselors here. Actually, why don't we take up item 15 while we're at it? So if we could just
Oh, I didn't see that.
make a motion to amend prior order and take up 15 with including this package, please.
All in favor?
All right,
So moved. Adding item 15, which was filed by Counselor Soto, ordered that a handicap sign be placed in front of 136 Sargent Street for Yvonne Mora.
but I'm okay with the motion if the handicap commission,
Well,
I'll second that, so.
okay, so let me go to item 16. This is for Philip Manzi at 100 Beach Street. The report from the commission indicates that they've received the appropriate copies that they need, that an inspection was made by Don Welch on 12/10, and recommend application approval on 12/10. So that's the first item. And we have these as a package right now. 195 Suffolk Street for Maria Vasquez. The documents were received. The site inspection was made by Don Welch on 12/8. Recommend application approval on 12/8. 16 Clinton Avenue for Robert Fitzpatrick. The proper forms were received. The site inspection was made by Don Welch on 12/8. Recommend the application approval on 12/8. And now we're on to Hector Velazquez. And the same proper forms were received. The site inspection took place on, looks like 7/16/15. Recommend that the application be approved. 7/16/15.
Was Yvonne Mora visited?
I'm sorry?
The Yvonne Mora one, was that a site visit yet?
136 Sergeant.
I'm not. I'm not seeing. Any attachments for that one. And I have the order in the jacket for 5 to 7 Martin Street, but I have no attachments with it yet.
That wasn't a handicap, was it?
No.
It was a removal.
Yeah, that was just removing
Oh,
the
a
sign.
removal.
Yeah,
Okay, so you don't need.
no. No, it's okay.
Oh,
Just-
but we did put it in with the other,
just 15 is included with the package. 14 is separated out.
hang on, I don't think I've actually pulled that one out yet. I'm not seeing. Out of 15.
Sorry, it may still be in their hands as the Commission on Disabilities.
It may be, but I didn't have time to number everything. Ryan put them in order, but
Well,
if I find it after, we can take it up. How about if we act on
16
the
through
package
19.
that we have before us
sure.
with the
Whatever's easier.
documentation from the disabilities? That would give us,
16 through 19.
yeah, 16 through 19. Do we need to amend our package to act on these since?
Why don't you withdraw the amendment to take up
Yeah,
15?
I would draw item, the amendment to add 15.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we have the original package of the 4 items before us with the Disabilities Commission recommending adoption.
Yeah, we have a second on that, so.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So we will go back to regular order.
Item,
Since you were the maker of the first order.
motion to take up number 1.
All in favor?
Aye.
So item number 1, filed by Councilors Jordan and Roman, order that an ordinance be created requiring the mayor to submit a balanced budget for the subsequent fiscal year to the city council by April 30th of each year. The mayor's budget proposal for expenses may not exceed the projected revenues for the subsequent fiscal year. The mayor may not use uncertified free cash dollars or unapproved withdrawals from the stabilization fund in his revenue estimate to provide a balanced budget for the subsequent fiscal year. Now, at a prior meeting, certain procedural questions were raised, and it's my understanding that Attorney Cunha has had an opportunity to look over the state law in this regard, so I'll yield to the maker of the order.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple opening remarks, and then we can ask Kara to share her thoughts. Basically, what we have is I'm trying to tap into a breaking of sort of a bad tradition. One is, first of all, as we all know, for quite a number of years, we have a structural deficit in the city. It's approximately in the ballpark of about $2 million, plus or minus. And essentially, this is exacerbating a bigger problem, because obviously, if we didn't need to go into reserves to balance our budget, in fact, back in the 90s, we were in such a good financial position such that we actually took money from free cash and actually put it back for tax relief. So we actually even gave additional dollars back. And of course, in those days, we would add to the stabilization fund, and that's how we have the stabilization fund that we have today. But as we know, that is not the case anymore. And so we have this structural deficit. And as a result, the mayors, for quite a number of years, have been proposing budgets such that when they had the tax levy dollars that would come in, we would have these additional revenues that would be earmarked to close the budget. But for the last 4 fiscal years, we no longer have that, as you know. We have the levy ceiling, which has come into play, such that we cannot go to additional resources from the tax levy in order to balance the budget. So as a result, we really only have 2 other revenue sources to cover the structural deficit. One is that we use free cash reserves, which is the unexpended money from the prior year, or we go and take our stabilization dollars. So those are the other 2 revenue sources. So at present, we have been doing, for the last 2 years, a combination of some stabilization money and basically almost all of the free cash to balance the budget. Now, this year, we actually have the additional wrinkle, which is to say that we didn't even have enough free cash to cover the deficit of the city budget, and as a result, we had to use stabilization dollars. Otherwise, we would not have been able to balance the budget, unless we're going to do a budget reduction. I suppose that's the third way you could do it, is you do a mid-year budget reduction and actually reduce the budget. This, of course, is not too good because theoretically, the dollars that you budgeted back in May and June were there for a reason. When you started, these were dollars that you needed to spend. We did happen to have one budget reduction this year, which was about $500,000 for health insurance. It was later determined that those dollars were not all needed, and so as a result, they were able to make that reduction. The problem that is presented now is that under the scenario for numerous years now, is that we're technically balancing the budget as required by the Department of Revenue to set prior to the sending of the 3rd quarter tax bills. For the 1st and 2nd quarters, those are estimated bills, but for the 3rd quarter, it has to be an actual tax bill. And so in order to have the authority to send that out, we're doing all these different machinations in November and December of each year in order for us to set the tax rates in order to send out these bills. What I find really troubling about this is the fact that all of these type of decisions really should be being made when we set the budget in the first place. And these are the difficult decisions that should be taking place over April, May, and June. So we take a look back, this fiscal year 16, which is the most extreme example that I'm talking about. We had a situation where the mayors submitted the budget the first week of May to us, and at that time, it was unbalanced by approximately $4.5 million. That is, the projected expenses were $4.5 million over the projected revenues. So then it becomes the duty of the city council at that point to either cut $4.5 million or do what we did this year, which is we made considerable cuts, $1.6 million in cuts, and then we had the remaining $2.9 million. Now, as we know, in this particular fiscal year, a couple months ago, we ultimately had the health insurance reduction of $500,000. And so we had to come up with 2.4. We ultimately landed on $700,000 worth of stabilization fund and $1.7 million in free cash. But I find this very troubling. This is not the best practice. We should be having a budget that is presented to us that is in equilibrium. I think it's in best practice that we have revenues equaling expenses from the chief executive, who has the authority to really determine the operations by how much he's going to budget for various things. And so he says to me that he is supportive of this concept. He's kind of interested to see how it all plays out. And I'm sure we'll have conversations with the mayor throughout this process. But no question, I think we need to get to a point where if there's going to be some reliance on free cash or no reliance on free cash, whatever it is, it's going to be very, very de minimis. But to have this situation where we are basically effectively the city council after we get the budget from the mayor, passing a budget which is millions and millions and millions unbalanced. This is ridiculous. And we should not be waiting to 6 months through the fiscal year to ultimately balance our budget. The problem that also results to that is, if we're gonna be good stewards and we're gonna be responsible people, then it's not gonna be good for the city if we're making budget cuts halfway through the fiscal year, because it's almost like you gotta make double the cut. These are things that we know we only have X dollars and we should be making these decisions. So we want the mayor to be presenting to us a budget which is as much to balanced as possible, ideally fully balanced. Now, I recognize that, the mayor is required to present to us his proposal. He has to give us a 45-day time period. We cannot be more restrictive than the state law. Less restrictive than the state law, but I believe we can be somewhat more restrictive. And so I'm interested to hear what the law department's review has, if they have any thoughts and on what we can and we cannot do. So certainly anything we do here will not circumvent state law. But I think the point is made, and I think even the mayor would agree that having a budget which is $4.5 million unbalanced when he presents it to us is not good for the city. And I think he's committed to fixing that. I think we need to be committed to fixing that. So I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Councilor Jordan. Councilor Roman, as the other maker of the order.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, and I thank you to my co-sponsor and primary author of the actual physical language. I just wanted to again say that through my onboarding and my introduction to being a city councilor, and also as a citizen and a constituent in the city of Holyoke over the past few years, seeing the budgetary process, and I hearken back to Christmas Eve when you all fine men and women had to come in way before my tenure here in the council chambers and set the tax rate and the budgeting. To me, as an individual walking in and getting orientated and looking at our city's budget and finances, just the unfunded pension liability fee schedule is, to me, the biggest and most glaring area for us to truly pass this order. Free cash is drying up, and good, bad, or otherwise, our unfunded pension liability fee schedule is going up year after year. And as a individual who's looking for this, I believe that this order in its spirit is truly, in its essence, a good way for us to move forward as a city. I am and happen to be one of those councilors who's willing to put forward an order and not be afraid on the revenue side of things. I know that'll screech people, and some taxpayers still hold. I'm sure I'll get phone calls tonight. What are you saying? What are you proposing? I'm looking into it. I've had some amazing conversations with great department heads. One in particular that I will share and I will actively go after as a councilor is the fire department, being the backup ambulatory unit, or our fire department serving as the primary safety medical emergency dispatching unit to bring some revenues into the city of Holyoke. But when it comes to this order in particular, I myself have reached out again, as most of us have, to the mayor's office, and I look for that leadership. I really do, and I hope that the spirit of this order is that, again, I come from a business and a retail management background. I had to set my annual budget as a retail district manager and store manager at the beginning of the year. I couldn't go over budget. We had to keep our EBITDA in line, and you had to keep payroll down and costs down. So I just feel that it's fiscally sound, and a lot of the constituents, especially in my ward, Ward 2, Springdale, Ingleside, who are looking to pack up and move out because their tax bills are super high. We have to do this. To me, it's just good stewardship. It's good in the spirit of the city of Holyoke, and that's why I'm here today and co-sponsoring and co-authoring it. And I would like to say for the record that when it comes to tapping into our free cash, our rainy day fund, our stabilization fund, I happen to have supported using the most amount that we could have. I know I was a counselor in waiting in the wings, but I would have supported the most minimal that we could have, in the hopes that, again, on the revenue side, I'm going to be bold, I'm going to be upfront and propose some revenue generating. But this, to me, is a good step in the first direction, and I look forward to hoping and hearing here in the law department, but hopefully it's passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Leahy?
Yeah, once again, I think this is a good order. I think the two of you gentlemen filed a good order. I'm glad you guys are talking about this early in the, I was about to say the season, but I suppose it is the season. We're talking about the revenue side. Of course, we all know the majority of the budget, the majority of what we see in front of us, this book here, is all personnel and mostly insurance as well. You know, some of the things we have to look at is, you know, can we maybe get on the Boston's GIC? Could we do things to limit the insurance costs, because they're quite high, not only for the city of Hoyoke, but for the employees as well. These employees who are paying for the family insurance plans are paying a lot of money. So we obviously all know it's personnel and insurance, but another areas that we can't touch, or we don't know, is overtime for the police and fire departments in the beginning of the year. And this certainly isn't this mayor, and it's been mayors past that have kind of unfunded the overtime and unfunded, and you're allowed to, the snow removal. Nobody knows exactly how much we're going to be paying for snow removal until it happens. And, I see the plows are out there now salting and sanding the streets. So there's a lot of different things. I would like to also see an area where we do capital improvements. So we start putting money aside for fire trucks and police cars and different things throughout the city. We've been very good and very diligent by putting miles of sidewalks and streets. But, having a discussion like this, I think, is a fantastic thing. And I look forward to hearing it.
Thank you. Counselor McGivern?
I agree with the, certainly with the spirit, and certainly with I wouldn't argue one thing that the president, Councilor Roman, and Councilor Leahy has said so far in terms of the intent of this order and the intent of having a balanced budget. I think we all have to be leery of that. I think we all have to be aware that it's something that we should achieve at a much earlier date each year than the third quarter. And certainly that just makes, whether it's your home budget, your business budget, or the $100 million city budget, it makes a lot of sense. The mechanism scares me, though, because yes, currently the mayor is in control of the appropriation, and as we all know, only the mayor can make an appropriation. It starts with the budget. If we adopt it, it stays in the budget. Additions and amendments can be made. Budget reductions can be done throughout the year. It's a snapshot that changes on a daily basis. What scares me is we as legislative body have a lot to say with the services that the city provides. The size of the police department, the size of the fire department, the size of the DPW. Do we or do we not pick up trash? Parks and Recreation, do we or do we not provide Parks and Recreation? And so on. Those are just some of the bigger budgets that we face every year, and we are certainly responsible throughout the year. So if we create an ordinance that tells the mayor by April 30th, before the city council gets their 45-day look at the budget, which is expenses on one side, and the mayor doesn't actually present it, but the auditor presents what we call the cherry sheet, which is the projected revenues for the most part on the other side, and makes sense that, whoever the mayor is basing the budget on the projected revenues, or at least we hope that. We don't always agree. We make some of our cuts, which I think is part of the process. We've done so over the last 4 years. But those are budget reductions. They're temporary. Unless we follow up with an adjustment to an ordinance, unless we follow up, I'll back up to the beginning, is currently we have a budget that's nothing but personnel. Nothing but personnel. Not one police cruiser, not one fire apparatus, nothing for the DPW, no snowplow. There's barely, just for daily operations, money in the budget for expenses, for paper, printing, things like that for most of our departments. And if we are going to reduce government, it means we have to take a hard look. And I think and I'm not speaking of Alex Morris or the prior mayor or the next mayor. I think that should be done collectively, not allow the mayor to make decisions of where the reductions are going to be in terms of reducing government. Notice I said if, because I'm not ready to reduce government. I'm not ready to give up on the services that we provide. And our financial advisor, who's been with us since the 90s, in the bleakest of times when we had a $5 million deficit when that was 1/3 of the budget was about to be cut in fiscal 92. The layoffs were astronomical in terms of not only the impact of it would have on each of the departments of the layoffs that would take place, but the unemployment factor had to be calculated into it, at least for a year. Nowadays, unemployment seems to be going more than a year. We are self-insured. I think most of us know that. So the reduction of the budget eventually translate to the reduction of services, and that's what we have to look at. Yes, I don't disagree with the structural deficit. We've recognized it for years. Yes, I understand the importance of balancing the budget, but I think we have to look at this not just from the budget point of view, but from the services that we provide. And we need to be careful because, you know, as good as the taxpayers are of this wonderful city, I think they expect us to fight for the services at a reasonable cost and at the same time, you know, protect them in terms of what they look for and need. Public safety, DPW, the Parks and Rec, you know, things that are important to Hoyokers. In ordinance as it stands, you know, I think it sends the right message, but I'm afraid it might send or force a mayor to be a little bit too strong at the wrong time and not give us the chance to fight for those services as we so often do.
Thank you. Do any other members of the committee? Councilor Lisi?
Thank you. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Councilor McGivern is saying here. I think there's merit to having a balanced budget, or I think I've heard it described in past terms as a budget that reflects actual operating costs as opposed to anticipating the free cash coming back to us and then setting up a budget that is counting in some ways on free cash and other subsidies coming in later on. But I don't see how creating the requirement of a balanced budget does anything to address the structural deficit, to address the retirement payouts and the interest that we're accruing on that account. Just because you're bringing down the ceiling on how much we could spend by creating the requirement that the budget is balanced doesn't mean that we're actually going to be addressing the issues that are causing the higher expenditures related to the structural deficit, healthcare, retirement, et cetera. So if anyone wants to elaborate on that, that would be of interest to you.
Okay,
Here,
just for 1
if I
minute, touch
may,
on that point.
Just so that we are getting the different perspectives to inform the discussion, if the committee is willing, I'd like to have Kara give us the overview.
Sure, could I just answer within 30 seconds, just Councilor Lisi's question?
Sure.
Yeah. This is not, well, we think the intent is not, you're right, will not solve the systemic problems of cuts we need to make, restructuring we need to make, where we spend the money. All this is saying is we already have a legal obligation to have a balanced budget. Okay, so that's already a state law. Just like state government is under the obligation. Washington does not, by the way. There's been debate nationally. They can have that's why we have this great national debt, right? $16 trillion. Massachusetts isn't allowed to have that. Holyoke isn't allowed to have that. What we're simply saying is we're moving up the calendar to say that when the mayor presents the budget, whatever decisions he makes, and that's his right to make them, that he has to give us a budget that is reflective of the revenues he has coming in. The problem we have today is that we're being handed expenses not equaling the revenues, and we're waiting 6 months. And then we're hoping that either other revenue sources come in, maybe stabilization, maybe free cash. Like this year, I don't think anybody projected that free cash was going to be below what it would have been needed to balance the budget. But to your point, Councilor Lisi, you're absolutely right. We need to continue to be vigilant on what is causing the structural deficit and what we can do to reduce either the cost of government or just make it what it needs to be within the confines of Prop 2.5 and everything else that we're allowed to do. But what this is simply saying is that this current practice, this is only a step in fixing our budget. What we're saying is we're not waiting till 6 months into the year to solve the budget. We're going to start it from day one of the budget for July 1st. And at that point, start making the decisions in April, May, and June. instead of waiting till September, October, and December, and November.
25 seconds.
Yeah.
A true 25 seconds. And Kevin, no, because Kevin is right. He is definitely right. But don't forget one thing. One of our revenue sources is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. A big part of it is schools. We don't get their budget sometimes till October. And they're the ones that are telling us we have to do this in May and April. That's not fair. And that's what we've been dealing with for decades.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Cunha, if,
Use 3
do I
minutes.
need a motion to allow her to address?
We motioned.
Did we, okay. So if you could share with us the overview of the state law so that we have sort of an outline as to how we might proceed.
I don't know if this is, oh, I think it's on. So the question that was raised, I think by Councilor Jordan and Councilor McGivern at the last meeting when the order was introduced was whether the city has the authority to do this in light of the fact that there is a whole statutory scheme for the budget process. And so the starting point really is the Home Rule Amendment, which allows a city or town to adopt any ordinance that isn't inconsistent with the laws or the Constitution of the Commonwealth. And so in this case, it's Chapter 44, Section 32 that sets up the procedure for the budget and requires that within 170 days after the annual organization of the city government, the mayor shall submit to the city council the annual budget
You said 170 days?
after the annual organization. Yeah.
And when is the annual organization of the city government?
I would
Is that when we're sworn in?
say it was, right, January 4th. So
Okay,
I
all right. Just so we
didn't
got it.
calculate what that would be, but
Okay,
and then obviously, as you know, the section goes on to state that the council may make reductions to the budget, and ultimately, if the council fails to take any action within 45 days after receiving it, the budget becomes law.
okay.
So the question really is whether the ordinance that you're proposing to require the mayor to submit a balanced budget would be inconsistent with the statutory scheme that the state has set up. And there actually is case law addressing this. First of all, there is a case that's held that the requirements of Section 32 are mandatory, that the mayor shall submit the budget to the council. But interestingly, there's a case that is from Holyoke, involved our ordinances and charter and budget. It's Wayland versus Holyoke. It was an appeals court case in 1982 where there was, and we still have, a city ordinance that prescribes the members of the fire department, how many captains, lieutenants, various, and then goes on to state that the rest of the force consists of the firefighters that are needed for efficient service. So in this case, the date that the mayor submitted the budget, there were 146 members of the fire department. The mayor submitted a budget that proposed 138 members. So it's a little bit different than when you're talking about, but if you bear with me, I think it's relevant. And so the union actually sued over this, and it ended up in the appeals court. And what the court found in that case was that in enacting Chapter 44 and the provisions for the budget, the state legislature had given the mayor the authority to set the ceiling on spending for the city. And that the mayor wouldn't be bound by an ordinance that tries to change that. And that case also looked to the legislative history of Chapter 44, which is important in determining if it was, if such an ordinance would be inconsistent. And again, found that the whole purpose of this was to give the mayors the authority to initiate the budget process. And again, that it would be the chief executive's authority to determine the maximum amount to be expended by the city. And when Chapter 44 was initially enacted, it also repealed any ordinances or charter provisions that were inconsistent. And so obviously that case held that the scheme, envisioned by the statutes is that it's the mayor that sets the maximum amount of the spending in the budget, obviously submits that to the council, and then by statute, it's the council's function to reduce those amounts. So I do think based on the Wayland case that an ordinance that would put a limit on the mayor's authority would be found to be inconsistent with Chapter 44 and the procedures that it's outlined. I mean, certainly, again, as you've expressed, the goal of it is a lofty goal, but I think you would be concerned about enforcement of it ultimately, because in the event that the mayor complies with the statute and submits a budget that may or may not be balanced, I mean, I think it is then going to be in the council's hands to act on that within the 45 days.
So,
Can I get on the list?
yes. So, just to follow up, within that same statute or a different statute, is that where the language is that requires that the budget be balanced? Regardless of what level of expenses the mayor sets?
Well, it doesn't explicitly require it to be balanced. It requires the budget to set out the, the expenditures. I'm just looking at this section. Statement of amounts recommended for proposed expenditures of the city for the next fiscal year. I mean, within this section, there is no explicit requirement.
But in another part of state
Yes.
law?
Well, there is for the state budget, but
What would that be
the balanced budget.
for the state?
I have those citations. I don't have them right here, but
Who enforces it? I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
right. That's yeah. But I didn't find that carries over to the cities or towns. I also didn't find any other city or town that necessarily had, and I certainly can look further, but that had such a requirement for.
Okay. For follow-up questions, I have Counselor Jordan in the queue.
Okay, Kara, I'll help you with the citation on cities are required to have their budgets are balanced already. This is a DOR regulation as well. And when with the assessors, will not allow a community to set the third quarter taxes, the actual taxes, unless revenues equal expenditures. Are we in agreement on that?
I agree with you, but that doesn't necessarily translate into a requirement that the mayor submit a balanced budget.
No, it doesn't. I'm not arguing it does. But are we in agreement on the point, just so that the
Right,
city
yeah,
budget
yeah.
must be balanced?
It has to be balanced, but.
And
yeah.
and that's a state legal requirement?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're two different issues, though, of what the
Well-
mayor's budget looks like and what that looks like come the tax rate being set, because that's where the statutory scheme really, and I think the case law supports that the mayor is the one who determines the maximum spending, and by statute, it's the council's role to then reduce that.
Well, if we're in agreement that the state law requires the city to have its budget balanced, we're also in agreement that the mayor under our charter is the chief executive of the city. He holds under the charter the executive authority, and he is the officer that's charged there de facto by the state to balance the budget. He already is required because, for example, he is the only person here who can initiate an appropriation. I think we're in agreement on that, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So therefore, if the state requires the budget to be balanced, he's the only officer that can balance it. Therefore, if you follow that obvious logic, is if the budget has to be balanced and he's the only person who can balance it, we can make reductions to it, but the top number ultimately has to be set by him, and therefore the requirement really is to the mayors that he has to have a balanced budget.
No, I wouldn't agree with the logic that the mayor's budget that he submits to you has to be
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. I didn't say that. But my saying is the duty to balance the budget under law is incumbent upon the mayor ultimately. For example, if the mayor said, this order really is one of only timing. It's not really one of the duty. The duty ultimately lies with the mayor that he has to balance the budget. Because if the mayor in the third quarter elects not to balance the budget and says, no, I will not submit a free cash transfer. No, I will not take withdrawals from the stabilization fund. Then the budget therefore would not be balanced. Because I can't initiate that. Joe can't initiate. Only currently, the current mayor happens to be Alex. He'd be the only person that could initiate that. Therefore, the duty is on the mayor already to balance the budget.
I think they're two separate issues. There's a duty that the
Well,
budget be balanced,
yes.
and then there's the
Well,
budget that the
what I
mayor
want to be clear about is that the mayor already has this duty. Now the city council is speaking to the timing of that duty.
Well, and I think the timing, and I don't know, we would have to look and see what the 170 days adds up to, but
It may not be April 30th. I put
Yeah,
that down there
certainly that
because
is.
I came up with the number of 45 days, and I mean, we could, if it means it's May 7th, or whatever that turns out to be, maybe it's earlier, I don't know, I'd have to get the calendar out. But the fact of the matter is that we're speaking of a question of duty, we're speaking now a question of timing of the duty. I don't see anything that precludes from what you've said. Now, the thing that I find interesting about the Whalen case, which I have read a number of times in the past, and that's a pretty, that's an interesting case, and why it's an interesting case, actually, I think that is, actually, as I mentioned to the mayor the other day, what sort of emboldens his authority under this whole tax collector situation is if somebody has a budgeted position or otherwise, they can't really force the mayor to fill it because he's the chief executive and you can't force the mayor to spend money that he elects not to spend. That's really at the crux of the Whalen case. What happened in the Whalen case, as I recall, was that the city council set a minimum number of firefighters. And the union, it was that number, some number, we'll just say 144 for the sake of argument, and the mayor elected to fund them at 139. The union then went in to enforce the council ordinance to say that the mayor must spend this money. Well, the Whalen case determined no, the mayor doesn't, the city council cannot force the mayor to spend money on things he doesn't want to approve. And therefore, it's still, these things are subject to appropriation. I think that's really the holding in the Whalen case. This is really something quite different. What we're saying is that the mayor already has a duty to provide a balanced budget, and what we're saying is that duty, which he already has under state law, is it going to be now in November, December, or is it going to be when he submits the budget early on? And that's the question that I want to see. Is there something that precludes the timing of that at the budget at its inception, July 1st must be balanced, or absent otherwise, right now, the only invocation is that it must be done before the third quarter taxes go out. Well, what some of us are suggesting is that's not in the city's fiduciary best interest. That really should be occurring for July 1st. And so that's kind of where I'm going with it.
Well, I mean, I think the holding of the Whaling case is clear that it's the chief executive who gets to set the cap on the amount of spending. And so by making a requirement that there is a balanced budget when it's given to the council, is the council setting a cap on the budget. And so I think that would be precluded under this case. And I think
Why? Because
that's-
wouldn't the cap be the same whether, we're not changing the cap?
You guys are kind of
Oh,
getting
okay,
into a
I'm
little
sorry.
bit of a debate here. So
Okay.
if I can interject, and then I have Counselor McGivern in the queue. I would just like to clarify that the circumstance we find ourselves in now is sort of the opposite of the Whalen case.
I agree, right.
Okay?
But I think
The
it's-
mayor wanted to cut expenses. We're in a situation now where the city council is being presented with a budget that is so far in deficit with the uncertainty of the revenues that are put before us to support it, that in spite of our best efforts to make what we can get a majority to make for cuts in an attempt to balance the budget, have gotten so far out of whack with the totality of the revenue that we're now almost consistently having to go to the stabilization fund to balance the budget. And there is no way that that is a sustainable budgeting process for any city, any business, anything. So from my perspective, what we're looking to the mayor to do is to substantiate to us the revenues for the expenses that we're not arguing he has the authority to determine the expenditures that he puts in the budget. We're simply saying, if you're going to present us with these expenditures, show us the money. And I just see that as a different argument. And my whole support for this endeavor is we have to do something, because if the city continues on the path it's on, not only will our schools be in receivership, our entire city will be in receivership. So the way I see it is we have two choices. We make the hard decisions, we live here, hopefully we know a lot more about the city and would do it in the best interest of the city more than a state receiver appointed out of Boston. But the truth of the matter is, if we can't, like Springfield didn't, we will end up like Springfield did. And that's my concern, and I want us to do it locally in the way that will hurt the least, and there's no appetite for an override in this community. I've been door to door enough, and I'm still getting the calls. So this isn't the 90s, and people aren't gonna bail us out with an override, in my opinion. Counselor McGivern?
The 175, 177 days is actually June 30th from January 1st. So it makes sense. You have to have a balanced budget by July 1 when the budget starts.
Okay, that makes sense.
Karen, taking it a step further, and I think everybody's on the same page, just looking at it a little bit different. But if we were to adopt an ordinance similar to what's proposed, would we not be telling the chief appropriation officer that you've got to set the cap here by July 1st?
Exactly.
You know, before we start our fiscal year.
Right.
And that cherry sheet that we get most of our revenue estimates from isn't finalized on July 1st. It rarely is finalized. We don't know what free cash is. I understand the proposed ordinance says to do this without free cash. I don't know how you could, you know, keep services going. I understand balancing. I agree with don't use stabilization unless the whole body of the city council and the mayor is in agreement as a part of the revenue. But at the same time, it's as right as it sounds, we're dictating to the mayor what the state can't do and what we've not been able to accomplish for the last 40 years. The Whalen case is a fascinating case. It's also pre-1982. It's pre-Proposition 2.5.
It was 1982 that it was decided.
It was the end of what was the Ernie Prue years of setting the tax rate in the election year as low, and Ernie knows I could say this because he did it.
Well, he
And-
can't,
and
he's
the
not
nine-
here to object.
He didn't raise the budget the next year to, to keep the services, and somehow just kept everything going in between years. It opened up everything to transparency, which was a good thing. But it also puts you into some tight positions, a levy limit, levy ceiling, as we know, when we hit it, and it makes it very difficult in a given year or two. Fiscal 92, and I think Councilor Bacon, makes note of the override. The good taxpayers of this city saved the city by passing an override. We're still one of the largest in the Commonwealth. And that was, we could argue forever, but that was to make up that structural deficit that was I shouldn't say falsely, that was created during the 70s into the 80s in the sense that it wasn't a true reflection of what the revenue picture should have been within the city. I'm getting a little bit off track here. Can we, at such an early time in the process, only because we don't really know the revenues, by law, tell a mayor that he has to do this by April? When,
And that's where, I'm not saying you can't pass the ordinance, but that's where it's gonna come down to the enforceability of it. I mean, the state law has clearly set up the statutory scheme, the time frame that the mayor has to give the budget, and I think the issue you're gonna be faced with is the mayor's going to give you a budget in accordance with the state law. If that is not a balanced budget, what's gonna happen at that point? I mean, either at that point, I don't know. I think the mayor's going to have complied with the requirements. The 45 days are going to start, and I'm just trying to say that if the council acts under the ordinance and, for example, rejects the budget or whatever, if a court is looking at this, these are the principles they're going to look at, and I think ultimately, as Councilor McGivern said, exactly what you're doing is requiring the mayor to set the budget at a certain amount. And I think it's directly contrary to the case law and his authority to set it at whatever amount he wants, obviously based on looking at the projected revenues that don't come in until later in the year. So that's really the situation. It's not that there's something that says you can't do this, but I think you have to think practically what's going to happen and how is this going to play out. And is it going to be productive?
We're going down a rabbit hole here, because
Hang on one minute, because,
any mayor-
excuse me, Counselor McGivern.
She was answering my question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
she said, he's all set, or you're all
No,
set?
No, he said
no,
she
I
was
just- it's a
answering
quick
his
follow-up.
question. I guess he has a
think this should be more
follow-up.
roundtable than, but give me 1 second. Kara, I agree, and I think, and again, I'm not disputing any of the arguments here, other than the fact it's a timing issue, and it's a scary timing issue, because if any mayor this year had to balance that $4 million so-called deficit, even though half of it was, or close to half of it was the sewer fund issue, which is not fair, if any mayor had to balance it, there would have had to been personnel cuts, and that would have created unemployment, and we'd be sitting in a devastated city at the moment right now. And I for one, want to fight for the services. And I know Councilor Bacon, and with the respect of her point, that, we just can't depend upon stabilization to balance the budget year in and year out. I agree. But we did hear our financial advisor over the last 30 years say, we have not let government grow since the 90s, which is a tribute to us, because most people in this roller coaster ride in 1992, we were ready to lay off a third of each of the big departments. And by fiscal 1997, 1998, we had surplus money being put into a stabilization fund. It can change with the blink of an eye. The levy limit, the levy to hitting the ceiling is a big factor here. Most of us, I think, believe we hit the ceiling because of the Mount Tom coal plant. There's not a lot we can do at the moment but weather the storm. And I, for one, think we should protect the services and weather the storm. And I just don't want to create an ordinance that would be contradictory to that. Thank you.
And I think just on the point of how this would play out, I guess that would be the mayor's decision. And I think Councilor McGivern is correct that if it was going to be balanced, there would be a significant amount of layoffs or cuts to city services starting July 1st for that.
Counselor Jordan?
Okay. We're not changing the mayor's authority to set the budget, period. He's currently using revenue estimates. Revenue estimates of dollars he may or may not even have. That's the point, okay? He can just make up fake numbers, therefore, and submit a budget based on fake numbers. This is saying, no, you have to be realistic based on reasonable revenue estimates that you have now, okay? For example, he submits a budget that is just totally out of whack, no rhyme or reason to the revenues that we have coming in. For example, 4.5 million short. So my point is he's apparently using some revenue estimate that he believes, some hypotheticals that he submits to us. Some of them are the budget, which are out of his control, but most of the others are not out of his control. We know it's in stabilization, and they should have a good sense if we're doing good accounting as to what the free cash reserves will be, okay? Those two variables are the biggest. We didn't see this year, they did a pretty good job on state revenue receipts. We didn't see, we did not have a variance as a result of that this year in the budget at all, zero, okay? What I'm suggesting to you is that this true-up that he's doing is left totally wide open for July 1st, and we're doing this massive true-up come November 1st, December 1st, like this, for example, this particular year. This is really problematic. What we're saying is, Mayor, you have the authority, set the budget, whatever you want to have for expenses. You have to have that reconciled with revenues that are reasonable, whatever reasonable is, but you better have some defense for that. That would be technically balanced. Even if he gave us, well, I think we're going to have more of this and more of that, it is balanced. The issue is this is going to be invoked for July 1st, not on December 1st. That's the issue here. He's still either way. Now, what we should say is, what we can put in is either some provision for reasonable estimates on July 1st with the opportunity to make a true up once either free cash is ultimately certified. But I think we need to get away from this notion of, and I would like to change that practice, about us relying on revenues related to unknown free cash numbers. We should be taking the free cash of this year, and if we want to spend it, or put it into stabilization funds so you know you have it. It's money in the bank. Then he can then take a revenue estimate off of that, which is realistic. Right now, they're just way off on the amount of money that they think they're using for free cash, and they're doing it at a later time. In all scenarios, the mayor is setting whatever he feels he wants to have for expenses. That doesn't change in any part of this equation. I get that that is the mayor's authority. Now, we have the authority to cut that number, okay, during the 45-day period. But the point that we have now is he's just submitting expenses way over the reasonable revenue estimates, and this past year is a perfect example of that. We should not allow that practice to continue. And I can't see where he has going to have to, he has to submit a balanced budget, he gets to set the expenses, but he's going to have to defend his revenue estimate. Generally speaking, they do a decent job. This particular year, not so much. It was in fact off. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't think we're encroaching on his authority. I think it's just a matter of the timing of it, that there has to be, the intent is to have a true up, that he's going to have to defend revenues. The other thing that I would like to see is what we do curb, and I would like to ask you to give your opinion on this. Do we have the authority to, in the mayor and his determining what the budget would be, that number, he is using revenue estimates. Do we have the authority under the ordinances to establish what the city of Holyoke will use as viable revenue resources? Or perhaps you need to research that further.
And again, I think my answer would be the same as my answer in regards to the ordinance. The mayor by statute and state law can use free cash and can use the stabilization for any lawful means as long as they are appropriated in accordance, which involves the council again. And so, I mean, that's, again, a field that's essentially occupied by state law and really comes down to, I think, as Councilor McGivern pointed out, the numbers come from the state. I don't think they're.
But think about that for a minute.
These are questions for the auditor. I mean, I can't answer the details of the particular budgeting procedure. I think those are better addressed to the auditor.
Okay,
and
well,
perhaps
we
the
maybe
mayor
have to
as
bring
well.
them in. I just want, my last point on this is, with the revenue estimates, why this is a problem is, he's using in his revenue estimates dollars from free cash, dollars from stabilization fund, before there's agreement that those dollars be approved from this body. How can you use estimates? What if the city council said, no, we're not going to give those to you? Then what?
And there'd be cuts and layoffs. There wouldn't be money in the budget.
That's my point, is that these decisions should be not waiting until July 1st, December 1st, because if you did have to make a cut or a transfer from one budget to another, you're already halfway into the year. I don't think it's wise budgeting practice to be using revenue sources that you have no guarantee that you're even going to have. And I'm wondering, does the state law address that? I mean, to say, well, I'm going to use, right now he doesn't even address it, right? He's like, well, I really don't know, so I'll just figure this out at some point during the year. I'll play this by ear. What we're saying is, no, give us a real revenue estimate and where you're going to get the money to defend the amount of spending you want to do. That would occur under this scenario, whatever that estimate is. okay? Because the term balanced is gonna be balanced in the notion of he has enough revenues to support his expenses. That's all that balance is gonna mean. But my point is, at that point, the council would be able to say, well, hold on a minute. The mayor says that we're gonna take $2 million from stabilization fund on July 1st and use that as part of how I'm gonna justify this amount of spending. Well, maybe the city council, when you're passing, as you're in your 45-day window, you're gonna say, well, I really don't wanna spend $2 million out of stabilization fund. So I will cut, I don't mind spending $500,000 maybe, so I'm gonna cut an additional 1.5, right? Because you've gotta have this ultimately with the idea that it's reconciled. Now, the mayor doesn't say really where he's gonna get his revenue from, quite frankly. He's submitting a budget 4.5 short and is basically waiting till the end of November, December to figure it out, at which point you come in with a situation that says, oh, okay, there's free cash didn't come in so great, revenue from the state is the same, and so I guess I'm gonna ask for more stabilization. And by the way, if you don't approve that, then all these series of doomsday scenarios come into play. You're either, we're not gonna be able to send out third quarter bills, all these, we're gonna have to do double the amount of layoffs because you're already 6 months into the year, and all these crazy things happen. This type of thing this conversation needs to be happening way before we're in November and December. So I don't wanna lose the forest through the trees here. I wanna get something that the mayor feels comfortable about. He agrees with the point about what I'm making here, I believe. But by the same token, I'm sure it's all gonna be in the mechanics of all this. But we need to do better, Holyoke. And we need to do better than what we're doing now, which is, it's 4.5 short and we'll just figure it out later, so.
Thank you,
But, and
Counselor.
that's where, sorry, if I can, I mean, I'm sure the mayor will be happy to address this, and I think that's where it's a conversation with the mayor, and you've said several times about the practices that are used, obviously the auditor, it's not so much proper to be dictated in an ordinance, because it really is a matter of the practice and the financial practices that are followed, and I know, like you said, the mayor is in agreement with that, but simply putting it in an ordinance, I don't know that can, it's really a conversation with the mayor and the auditor in agreement how to proceed. An ordinance doesn't, I don't think, add, like I said, but the enforceability of it is gonna be the ultimate issue of how are you going to enforce that ultimately?
Just to be clear, we've asked Attorney Cunha to come in, give us her overview of her interpretation of the state statute, which she has done. And Counselor Lisi is in the queue, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I was actually just going to make the same point that Kara is making now, that it seems that it's a procedural change as opposed to a policy change. I think that when the mayor gives his, he presents us with the budget and he gives a conversation about what's going on, it needs to be much more in-depth and substantial than what we've presently been presented with, so that we can look at the budget that he's presenting and be like, okay, so, how are we going to reconcile, these estimates with, there's a number of variables, there's free cash, there's stabilization, there's cuts that the city council would make, there's also, the setting of the tax rate would affect the budget significantly. So it would be really great to have a better understanding of, where the money's coming from, what it's going to go to, and then we would have a realistic number of, I said number, but rather dollar amount of cuts that we'd want to make. But I do think that it's more of a, procedural as opposed to, creating policy and like building, the ordinance book out. I think that it would really be more productive to just have the ability to say to the mayor, we want to see this, we want to have a conversation about this, and to foster some better communication and, I guess in some way shared responsibility over what that budget is going to look like and how we're going to get to a number that's reconciled on both ends.
And I don't think there's anything in our discussions in the budget conversation that preclude us as a body in the city council from saying we will not entertain unappropriated monies as revenues in the budget, and we will not entertain unapproved revenue streams that have not been placed into the ordinance book, such as fees that have never been worked through the council. We won't recognize those as revenue. I think that's within our authority. Council Roman?
Thank you so much, Kara, for coming and speaking. I really appreciate it. And again, I speak on behalf of a lot of the residents of Holyoke who are laymen, who don't understand the budgetary process. So you, again, and thank you to Councilor McGivern for calculating the day. So under the state statute, it's set at 170 days, correct, for the budget to be balanced. So currently, the budget is received in December, and that's when we balance it. So if this statute was to say the miraculous 170-day marker that matches the state statute, would that then be in compliance, or no?
Well, no, I mean, the state statute just says that within 170 days after the organization, the mayor has to submit to the city council the annual budget. It doesn't say what that, I mean, it specifies the budget has to spell out maintenance, salaries, capital expenditures. It doesn't require that at the time the mayor gives it to the council, what the mayor is giving matches up with the revenue. It doesn't have to.
Thank you,
And
and I-
that's where the council's power to then cut comes in.
Perfect, and I appreciate the answer to that. And then through you, Madam Chairwoman, and to my fellow councilors, and that, to me, again, and to me, the spirit and the excitement of this order, and I do applaud the mayor's office, who is in the spirit of handing in this budget balance, but to me, then that means the mayor can technically hand in the budget way over, and then we would have to cut, let's say, 10 million. And to answer Council McGivern, I was also here when the woman from the bond council was here, and she did say we did live within our means and that we have to come up with new revenue generating streams for the city of Holyoke. And that's why I co-sponsored this order with Councilor Jordan, in the spirit that I'm one of those councilors to be bold and talk about actual revenue streams that come before the council, though, that have been approved, that we've been able to debate, discuss, vote up or down, and have those conversations before they hit to us with these revenue generating expenses, as the chairwoman was saying, that aren't in the budget yet. And with regards to cutting services, I've heard this argument a lot. I happen to be a counselor as well who loves to preserve services, but around this budgetary, and this has nothing to do with you, Kara, just to my fellow counselors, when we were looking at the transferring of free cash, an additional $200,000 to the police and fire department, to me, it just makes sense that at the beginning of the budgetary process, that's in there. And I know that the fire chief did request that money. So to me, it makes sense as the chief executive. It's there from the beginning. We talk about it, and we have those honest conversations from the beginning. And again, I look forward to in stating that let's be a leader. Again, in the city of Holyoke, I'm always championing different things. This is not like this ordinance does not exist in municipalities across the U.S. Yes, it might not exist in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but being an original Connecticut boy and knowing communities in New York and Midwest, this type of local municipal ordinances do exist. And I think that the city of Holyoke can maybe take the leadership role on it. I'm willing to be a counselor to say, hey, the city's taking a stance, and this is the practice, and let's lead on it in the Commonwealth. And maybe that is needed. And with all, due respect to Councilor McGivern and everyone else who's spoken, you're absolutely right. The budgetary process right now, and again, I know I may be naive and novice, but thank God I have a great friend in former Holyoke Mayor Elaine Pluta, former Councilor of Ward 2, who has given me in-depth knowledge. I call her nightly on this budgetary issue, and she said, Nelson, this is the way it is, and I understand. And I said, but we have to make it better. And she said, I absolutely agree with you. So we are doing this in that order, and I believe that, and I would encourage my colleagues, let's be the leader then. Let's see. And I'm okay with it being challenged. Let's talk about that then. Let's have that discussion, and let's lead in the Commonwealth and say that the city of Holyoke does not want its receivership as far as the state taking over our financial stability of our government. And to me, and again, I thank you and I applaud you for being here, Kara, I don't think that we will be out of our legislative duty as the legislative branch of government. And that's where I respectfully agree with Councilor Lisi. I know we'll agree on tons of other things, but I do believe that we should set and dictate that any chief executive of the city going forward should present the revenues and expenses balanced.
Thank you. So in terms of this agenda item for tonight, I think we have gotten some basic feedback from Kara on the statutes. Thank you very much for looking that up. We've batted around some philosophical issues, and we've talked about some technical issues. So I think from my perspective at this moment, we need to table this item to get more information, to do a little bit more research around the whole expense revenue discussion, because I think while I'm getting some of the points on not being able to set caps for the mayor in terms of how many expenditures he can list in the budget, I think it would be irresponsible for us not to be addressing the revenue question. So I think there's a lot of homework to be done by a number of us, and so I think at this point, I'd entertain a motion to table to receive.
Can I just make one point before we go to table? Because
Okay,
I
I
do
don't
agree.
have a second yet, so I guess you can.
Thanks. I do agree with you, this should be tabled. Just a couple follow-up points is, one, I think we need to have have the mayor in. I think we need to have the auditor in, and have a conversation about, ultimately, whatever we agree on is gonna be the procedure. Then that should go into ordinance form, okay? At a minimum. It's great to say, well, this will be what we want to do, and this is nice, but it's got to be written down, it's got to be formalized, and it's got to be made, but there should be a lot of dialogue about that. The other thing I will do by way of follow-up too, because Kara was extremely helpful tonight, but I will also try to touch bases with the Department of Revenue to also find out about my former stomping grounds when I worked for the DOR, to find out some more of what we can and cannot do in terms of some of these things too. And so maybe I can get some outreach to the law department there as well on some specific language and say, this is some of the things that we have in mind. We're going to need a lot of input from a lot of people because I think this is going to be very helpful. So, great. And I want to thank everybody. This is a great first step on this process. Thank you.
Thank you all. So on the motion to table, I have a motion. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, I'll accept a motion to take up item 3.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So this was filed by Counselor Bartley, that the city council consider deleting the no left turn ordinance on Whiting Farms Road at Kmart Plaza. Further, the city council consider ordaining a left turn only lane into the Kmart Plaza from Northampton Street. And I notice our engineer, Yam Lip, is here with us. If you could join us, thank you. Thanks for coming down. I did see you come in.
Thank you.
We want to invite him in since we have a number of traffic.
Would you like to come in? Because I think you have the fair majority of the agenda. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. The maker of the order would like to hear from you.
Number 3, correct?
Yes.
I have email communication with the real estate division of Kmart, and they give me no indication that I did mention that the cost to make improvement to the change, and they have no interest in that. But again, to eliminate the no left turn, we would have to remove some of the granite curbs, realign the island so that you can make a proper left turn, and the lane width on. I assume I'm reading the second sentence that you meant the Whiting Farms Road and not Northampton Street.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. Whiting Farms.
Yeah.
Now, again, the width of the road is it's adequate to accommodate the through lane, 12-foot through lane, and the no left turn.
I'm glad so you've done the measurements, and it looks like it works as far as engineering is concerned?
Correct.
Okay.
But again, we have to do some, the hardscape, they have to make some changes, and that involve construction, and this is not the best time.
No, probably not the best time, but now's the best time to get it in the hopper, and so that when it comes to spring, I mean, I've had, never mind. It's at some point it'll be the best time for the DPW. So just make it clear. So you were able to reach out to the Sears Holding Company's real estate division, and they actually replied?
Yes.
Oh, that's exciting. That's pretty rare. Good for you.
My buddy was the facility director for the area, so.
Perfect. Perfect. That's right, Counselor.
But still, there's no, as far as cost sharing for the work, that, they're not
They don't
interested.
wanna pay.
Well,
Do we know?
do you want me, should I go through? it? Yeah, I'd be happy to, yeah. I'd be happy to.
Do we
Can
know
you
the
give it
cost?
abbreviated version, because we've been through this a number of times already.
Right, it's,
Yeah, so for the public, this is the, okay, this is the entry, correct me if I'm wrong, Yam, but this is the entry exit way to Kmart Plaza on Whiting Farms Road. And a number of years ago, it was always allowed to, for decades, to allow motors to take a turn from Northampton Street south onto Whiting Farms Road and take a left-hand turn to enter Kmart Plaza. That was allowed for decade after decade after decade, and then it was changed. And the change was done for various reasons, but the change had some unintended consequences. That is, the no left-hand turn sign into Kmart Plaza on Whiting Farms Road is ignored on a daily, hourly, almost minute-by-minute basis by the traveling public, as evidenced by police report after police report that we've received from a police car sitting outside there with its lights on, and cars just make the illegal left-hand turn into Kmart Plaza. I've seen PVTA buses make the illegal left. I've seen official governmental vehicles painted red, white, and blue, and black and white make the illegal left-hand turn into Kmart Plaza. It happens all the time, every single solitary day. So, the hope was that we could perhaps make that turn, if we're going to change it, make it safer. So I got the intent of when they originally had it, but so allow motors who want to turn left, turn right off of Northampton Street and turn left into Kmart to have a dedicated lane for that, and that's the purpose of this.
Okay, got to understand the proposal. So you guys have been discussing this for a little while, and
We're just waiting to hear back from the Sears
Right.
Holding.
No, that's where we are.
and you're saying it can be done.
Correct. Yeah.
do we know the
So now the
cost?
question is, should we do it?
Well, I'll leave it to
If I can.
the experts.
Do you know the cost of this at this point, or would that have to go out for a further?
It's tough to come up with an estimate. It's such a small,
Right, so
job.
it's not a huge job.
It's in the range of 2,500 to 3,000.
Okay, so, and I would just note that the other benefit of making that a legal turn is for the people who are law-abiding, that are staying in that left lane and waiting to go straight and take a right, it's causing that traffic to back way down Northampton Street. And so that might be alleviated a little bit too, so. All right, so, does somebody want to make a motion on this?
Motion that we adopt?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I'll accept the motion to take up item 4.
Action Jackson.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, this order filed by Counselor Jourdain, that an ordinance be created establishing no parking on the odd side of Beacon Avenue near the corner of Canby Street and Beacon Avenue, and the driveway to 27 to 29 Canby Street. Neighbors across the street are unable to get in and out of their driveway.
This is a tricky one. I drove by this morning, and what I noticed out there in front of, across from number 2729 Canby Street, I believe the resident has a long utility van
Pickup truck,
and a pickup truck.
yeah. The gentleman that lives at 52 Beacon.
Correct. So if there's no parking on his side of the street, then he would be able to make the turn, accessing, entering and access. Or, alternatively, no parking on the other side.
Correct. The problem we have now is inconsiderate people in the group home across the street who have a large driveway. Their workers don't seem to care what the residents have to do in terms of getting in and out. So they park on both sides, and so the gentleman and his family cannot get in and out of their driveway. So we can either have parking on this side or parking on that side, whichever. They've got plenty of room to park on Canby. They got a big driveway, but the situation here is I elected to pick the side that's, still allow parking in front of his house, okay? But to have no parking on that one section from the driveway to the end of the corner of the street, which is, whatever number of feet that is. And this way, they can make their turns in and out. But the problem you got now is cars on both sides, and nobody can get in and out. So, that's the situation.
Again, it's a narrow road.
It is.
This is up to you, if you want to decide which side of them.
Okay, so it's allowable,
Yep.
there's no reason, no technical reason from your point of view not to.
It would-
If I, go ahead.
I should have phrased that as a question. Is there any technical reason against doing it?
Well, again, it comes to enforcement, first, enforcement, and again, signage, and is it, which side of the street do you want to pick?
Okay.
Yeah.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. There was a similar situation, it's similar, not exact, but in front of Jan's Flower Shop.
Right.
And I can't remember, I think we did some curb painting there, like the yellow line, and then said no parking from here to, Counselor Bartley, do you mind helping refresh my memory on what we did there? But it seems like that, the curb painting,
Yeah, so Jan's Flower Shop is on South Street, and what we finally agreed to do was, the engineer wanted to put one parking space, but we opted to have 2 spaces, 15-minute cap between certain hours, so regular business hours.
For them to go in and out of the store.
more mobility. I guess what was in my mind was if we did some yellow curb painting to designate no parking as opposed to the sign.
Yeah, I don't object to.
If it work.
Yeah, in terms of it's a sign here from, the end of their driveway to the corner, because they're the house right on the corner across the street. So you've got a sign here and then a sign, because I don't think you're supposed to park, 20 feet to the corner anyways, right? Something like
25,
that?
in some
Or
instances,
10?
50.
50, okay, 50. Well, gee, if that was 50, we almost wouldn't need this, but.
Main road.
If it's 20, but,
Maybe
yeah,
just
if you have
a
2 signs, a thing that is like hash marks on the ground or yellow curbing, or, that's fine.
Because the other thing is, I feel like you're not by law supposed to park a certain distance within driveway to begin with, because you shouldn't be blocking the view and the ability of cars to get in and out of the driveway. I don't know what that footage is, but it seems like if they're at the corner and then you have the driveway, it's only a certain number of feet that you need to actually designate no parking, and so the yellow curbing might be more, I don't know,
Aesthetic.
cost-effective and.
Yeah, either a sign or paint the curb or whatever. Of course, what you're gonna get, well, hopefully, is
The
you're not
police will
gonna,
say they can't enforce it
I
without
can't
the
see
sign.
it, is that really no parking?
Sign to enforce.
Yeah, and they're just, unfortunately, the folks involved are just not being nice to neighbors, and it's gotten to a point where, this went to, can't we just talk this out, to finally a decision had to be made, This was the happy medium that if, for the workers at this particular group home, you can park on Canby, you can park on this side of Beacon, you can park in your driveway. Any one of these, just don't park on both sides of Beacon, Canby, and your driveway. And it was like, this guy, it's Gandara, and, ran it up to Gandara's leadership, and, we'll take care of it, won't be a problem, and, it just keeps happening and happening and happening, so whatever we need to do is to just take care of these neighbors and move on.
Okay, so is this language depicting what you want as it's written?
Yes.
So I'll accept a motion on the order.
Make a motion that it be adopted.
Can I add one thing?
Oh,
I
sure.
have not looked and, done my measurement. I mean, there may be a lesser amount of spaces that we can eliminate. So.
Sure, whatever, so many feet from their driveway and so many feet from the curb.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fine. Just give us the final measurements when you do the legal form.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, a motion to take up item 5.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Filed by Counselor Bartley, that the city council amend parking ordinance on Westfield Road near Blessed Sacrament that will allow for parking during weekend masses and will provide additional parking space.
Yeah, so.
you had a chance?
So, yeah, there's all sorts of, you can't park on Northampton Street, for example, and except for, certain hours. And I wanted to do something similar to that on Westfield, Westfield Road between Northampton and Martin Street. That's a basic, on the,
On the church side or the house side?
on the house side, not on the church side. But
So-
that was the thinking there. Just so it would be the,
Is that the
the,
odd or
the- the
even?
south,
That's gonna be the
south side,
odd side of Westfield Road,
yeah.
because the school's at 148.
Now, again, this is a narrow road, 28-foot width road, so you need 12-foot lane. That leaves you with only 2 feet of shoulder. You would like to have at least 6 feet of shoulder to be able to accommodate on-street parking. It's a busy road.
Oh, I agree. It's kind of a, I don't, see, I want to put, make it legal what the practice has been for, 60 years. Because there is parking up and down Westfield Road on that street every
Sure.
Saturday and Sunday. So I was hoping just to make it a legal practice, but if, I mean, I don't want to complicate.
It's just not doable unless you allow parking on tree belt, sidewalk.
Okay, so what you're saying is we should probably just sort of let it go and let because people,
Can I make a friendly suggestion?
you absolutely can.
Counselor Jordan?
What we allow right now is Saturdays after 4 and Sunday mornings in front of Blessed Sacrament on Northampton Street. It's the same situation on Westfield Road. There's no 6 feet of shoulder on Northampton Street, as you know, in front of Blessed Sacrament Church. So if,
But there's adequate lane width for, for northbound and southbound. on
the southbound,
Northampton
the lane is wider
Right.
than Westfield Road?
Street. Correct.
I see.
I would just remind the counselors that that's about 1 block below where we just had that fatality.
Yeah,
It's
but,
a dangerous area on that road.
well, yeah, that was a medical condition that caused that, but, yes, so that was that, wasn't the roadway. But put that aside. So I guess we'll just have a nod and a wink for this going forward. I guess we'll just kind of let it roll. If that's, okay, and just on the, there is a sign there that says, just before the stoplight on Westfield Road, it says, no parking here to the corner. Is that, and meanwhile, there's what you're saying, so there's no parking at all on that side of the street, theoretically, but there's a sign specifically says there, no parking from here to the corner. Now, why would that be in place?
I guess if you were to park, if you pull over and to park, say, onto the tree belt or the grass strip a little bit, and then that's doable beyond the intersections, and absolutely no parking at that, and that, within that area where we have signage.
Okay, so is that an engineering standard? I guess that's my question.
I'm gonna have to look at that one, but I'm just, speaking on, yes, based on just sightline and clearance.
Okay, so this one, we'll just have to withdraw it, I guess. It's not, doesn't really look like there's much else we can do at this point, so. I would say, I mean, we'll just have to,
Yes.
Always revisit another time.
yeah, another time, it's okay. We'll just give a leave to withdraw.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You. Motion to take up item 6.
So
All in
moved.
favor? Aye.
All right,
That the speed limit on Lower Westfield Road be reduced from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour for the portion of the road from Homestead Ave that leads up to the Elks. That's my order, and I'm not even sure if it's doable, but I just wanted to put it out there for consideration.
I've looked at the road grade, and I've looked at the traffic pattern, and based on its 11% grade, and that design speed for that should be between 20 and 25 mile per hour.
Okay.
And so I looked at the stopping sight distance also, because it's a steep and curve, and 30 mile an hour, that should be 200 feet of sight distance, and we only have 140 feet of sight distance. So that puts you in the 20 miles an hour range. So I would
Great.
recommend changing the, putting
Oh,
posted
thank
speed
you
to
very
20.
much for that. I have had so many complaints up there, people flying up there.
Engineeringly, very sound proposal.
motion to adopt?
Second.
All in
Yeah.
favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Motion to take up number 7?
All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Order that we add a stop sign at the end of Lynn Ann Drive going easterly at Lower Westfield Road per recommendation of DPW and engineering. The reason I filed this so late is because somebody had put the recommendation in my locker, and I found it about 4 months after somebody put it in there. And there's been a lot of issues up there, that sort of partial rotary that's not really a rotary.
Correct, yeah.
And so when the people come up to the top of Whitney and there's a stop sign, and then they proceed partway through the quasi-rotary, there's another stop sign. So the neighbors have asked me, can't that stop sign be moved to the end of Lynn Ann? So then you're stopping at the top of Whitney, you're stopping at Lynn Ann, and then everybody has to stop before they go in the pretend rotary. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So, again, I looked at an intersection, and I also noticed a missing street sign. So that's in the work order to have that.
Oh, great, so you
replaced.
already put that through?
It will be.
Oh, okay, but you will, and we don't have to file an order?
No.
No, not for replacing existing sign. So I would recommend installing a stop sign at the intersection of Lynn Ann Drive and the 4 other streets.
Okay, yeah.
Motion to adopt?
No, it's 4 other streets, really. It's a rotary, so
It-
pick one.
I don't know, is that Whitney or is that Lower Westfield? I don't know.
It's Whitney and Lynn Ann.
There's also
and
Rich,
Lower Westfield as you exited.
What's the
whole, like,
street
Richard
with the
Eager.
actual, rotary?
It's where they all
Got a
meet.
map right here.
It's where they all meet.
Richard Eager, right?
Which street is that?
It may technically be the extension of
So you're
Richard
saying
Eager.
there's a potential naming rights?
It's a mess, is what it is.
That's
So
That's all I
think we
need.
have- Did we have a motion and a second?
Seconded, yeah.
They can circle someday.
Yeah, there-
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
8 and 9 is package, please.
All in favor?
all right,
Okay. Item 8, ordered that Donley Street be posted residential parking. Please bring in Chief of Police and City Engineer to discuss. Item 9, ordered that no overnight parking signs be placed in front of 5 Donley Street and across from 5 Donley per request of residents. I do have an update in that regard. This was motivated out of a long-standing vacant decrepit house on that street, and it was leading to people breaking into it, hanging out in it, and the people doing other potentially illegal activities sitting over there from across the street. since then, I received a call from one of the neighbors that the house was sold. And so
It's
the
nice,
issues,
yeah.
pardon?
It's being fixed up, I think the exterior is,
And,
yeah.
and so I think the issues that led to this may be pretty much resolved, just as an update, but I'd still be interested to see what your thinking is on that.
It's tough for subdivision street.
Yeah.
Again, it's plenty of parking. I would say if you can table this and see what happened, I would say that would be best.
I think that sounds good too, so.
Continue the table.
I'll withdraw.
Well, how about if we just table it to make sure everybody up in the neighborhood is okay?
But they're finally cleaning that house up, huh?
They did-
Yes, yes.
Oh, nice.
It got sold, and one of the neighbors called me and said, yay, we're having a party.
'Cause that's been years and years.
And that's been a
Well,
problem.
yeah, yours truly was on one side, on the bad guy's side, but we sold it. We moved it. It took, well, believe me,
Now we know who to blame.
believe me, you should, now you know who to thank. Yeah, now you know who to thank. That was my, so I think we can safely say that we did a fair amount of work on that, but it's done now, and it was sold to somebody who's put a lot of time and energy, and I believe he's gonna, now it's really ready for sale. It's become a beautiful home. So, but,
Motion 8 and 9 be tabled.
second,
All in favor?
all right,
Thank you.
Motion to remove 10 from the table.
second,
All in favor?
all right.
Ordered that DPW install blinking crosswalk lights at the corner of Nonotuck and Lincoln as soon as possible, filed by Counselor McGee.
Again, this setup, the cost is range from $8,000 to $10,000 to install. What I would recommend is the solar powered, they call it rapid flashing beacons. Could either be red flashing or yellow flashing. I would recommend red. And it's solar power, and the two signals can be radio connected, synchronized, without having to, we wouldn't have to dig up the road and having to install conduits to connect the two.
And are those readily available? Because I know there's been concern about a number of school intersections, that's why I asked.
If
There'll be
funding,
10 requests as soon as this one's done.
again, it's $8,000 to $10,000 per setup.
For the solar one?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I do recommend putting one in that intersection, but again, we would, DPW would like to, see what.
It's a money issue.
Exactly.
How long do these last? Are they reliable?
I believe there is a 4-year warranty type, when you first have it furnished and installed. But it should be easily 10 years. Obviously, without getting knocked. It could be accident prone because that intersection has quite a few accidents based on the last 5 years. So it could. But if it's untouched, left untouched, they could easily be 10 years.
So if, Counselor Lisi?
The only thing that I wanted to offer is that I remember having some conversation with Matt Sokop previously about different crosswalks, and he was very favorable towards the solar-powered ones, David. And I remember the ones that he said he would be hesitant about installing are the ones that have the lights in the road. So if you go like on 116 across from Mount Holyoke, they have the lights like on the road. And he said those get broken very easily because of like plowing, et cetera. But the solar paneled ones seem to be pretty reliable, and also
Those are
the radio.
$100,000 per setup.
What is that?
Those are $100,000 per
On
setup.
the road?
Yeah.
So as a practical matter, if we adopt this and refer it to DPW, then I guess it would become a matter of the budget.
It would be.
Is it in the budget, or would it need a separate appropriation?
We don't have any budget for that.
So that it would become
We would need to
subject to
ask.
that. I mean, he would have to put it in the budget, and if he gets it, then.
It'd be subject to cut, there's a new ordinance to balance the budget.
And let's hope they're not more than 4 million again.
Motion
So
to
what is
adopt.
the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion to adopt. All in favor?
Aye?
And then would it be Counselor Bartley that would request an appropriation from the mayor?
This is filed by Counselor McGee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
Counselor McGee would need to make
when
that.
he becomes aware that it's adopted, then he can follow up
Yeah.
for his
definitely.
board.
Maybe we can have Ryan, if you're listening,
Send him
send
a SOS.
an email to McGee.
Okay. Motion to take up item 11.
So moved, second.
All in favor?
Aye?
That the city consider replacing the bus stop at the corner of Hampshire and Maple Streets. It was recently deleted, but serves as a busy connection between buses coming down Hampshire Street. Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. So I got a couple of constituent phone calls about this stop. I know that we did a very large audit and revamping of the bus stops that were basically presented to us from PVTA, and the city engineer reviewed them. This was one of the changes, but it seems that there's some demand that the stop be replaced. Do you have any opinion or thoughts on this stop in particular?
I ran to one of the PVTA's staff. He was just assessing different, just work order, come up with work orders and improvements. And he doesn't seem to think it would be any issue to reinstall that. But I haven't heard back from him since. Again, I talked to him about 3 o'clock. I was out checking different areas, and so I'm waiting to hear back from him and his office. But
Yeah,
Could request it.
I guess, we create the bus stops out of ordinance, right? So I guess the other stops that are on Maple Street are by the senior center on Appleton, and then the next one would be all the way down either on Essex or Cabot, but by the library.
yeah,
So I think that the argument that it is some distance to walk to get to either of those stops from Hampshire is fairly legitimate.
I again, I
Stop.
would.
Yeah, right. So if there's no objection from the committee, I'd like to recreate this stop and send a message over to the PVTA in whatever capacity is appropriate.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you, Yam.
Adopt and send to PVTA. Okay, motion to take up item 12 is in order? Second, all in
Second.
favor? Aye. This is your order, Counselor Bartley, to amend the Holyoke Court of Ordinances that pawnbrokers and secondhand dealers, by requiring that all city businesses subject to these laws be required to photograph any merchandise it receives, buys, and sells, and to photograph any sellers, and then upload the photos onto a police computer system for the purpose of making an electronic record. Currently, pawnbrokers are only required to keep a book open to the inspection of the mayor or city council or any other duly authorized person. Further, the amendment should require said dealers to hold items for at least 30 days prior to resale, and the amendment should require pawnbrokers and secondhand dealers to register with the chief of police like peddlers, hawkers, and the solicitors must. Counselor Bartley?
I'm ready to make a motion on this, motion to adopt. So, there's never nothing else to do at this point. We already had a long discussion on it. We had the expert from the state police come in to recommend it. We had one other business person, and we had a discussion with him, but there wasn't really an objection. But I think that the purpose behind this is, take a look at today's paper. Perfect example. You've got an evidence locker in Springfield where everything's on paper, everything's in envelopes, and nothing's computerized. And now you've got a possible, real fraud on the city of Springfield's hands. So, and you look at our ordinance, ordinance is archaic. Write it down on paper. Put it on paper. Whereas other municipalities around us, West Springfield, others have had this computerized. This is a very mild request. It's a low hurdle. It is not burdensome. And it provides what? It provides electronic evidence cataloged in an efficient manner for prosecutors and police investigators, detectives to look up the data. We have a photograph of the seller. We have a photograph of the merchandise. We have it all cataloged electronically. That's what this is saying. This is not targeting a particular business per se, except for the fact that we're now going to have casinos coming. Let's face it, casinos bring a. There's going to be a possibility of more larceny, more fraud, more theft. It'd be nice to get a practice and procedure in place way ahead of the game so that stuff gets on record and that Holyoakers who are unfortunately subject to illicit activity possibly have a means and methods to recoup their property. That's it.
Thank you. And if I recall correctly, when the pawnbroker people came in, they said that they take pictures of all the items already.
Yeah,
Am I remembering that correctly?
right, but this goes a
But
step
it would
further.
be sharing it, absolutely.
And it's, furthermore, it's at no cost to the city, by the way.
Right. Councilor Lisi?
So the state
I'm
police,
sorry.
state police comes in, sets it up, trains everybody, gives them the software, and off you go.
Councilor Lisi?
Thank you. I think I felt like there was still some further questions that we had because of like the software requirement or I forget what it was exactly, but maybe, Kara, do you remember it all? Because I felt like there were.
I think I have an update to your question, because when I was speaking with Ryan, he said he had followed up with the chief, and he had a little concern about the capacity to hold all the photos. But they're upgrading the servers in City Hall, so it was thought that when that upgrade occurs, that concern would be diminished. And so it would seem to be no harm in adopting the order, and maybe the technology will have to catch up a little, but then the order will be there. Councilor Jourdain?
My question was, how long are the police going to be allowed to hold on to the pictures and the pictures of the merchandise, more importantly, the pictures of the people? We're expecting them to hold it for a year? Is it a period of 6 months? I would be kind of interested to know that.
And I think also, if I may.
Because, I'm just kind of, the theory being, I am a person, under the presumption that most of these transactions are legitimate, honest transactions. I've always been suspicious, not of people that use pawnbrokers, but more of the pawnbroker business itself. The business side, as you know, I led the charge here to institute the Division of Banks mandatory rules that they cannot charge residents more than 36% interest on these loans. The state came out with a regulation. You had, before we did that, it was like the Wild Wild West. You had people being charged 100% interest and et cetera on these things. The state came in and said, we will not recognize any loans greater than 36%, and we won't certify any city ordinances that allow pawnbrokers unless it institutes this. So I've been a little bit suspicious of the pawnbroker business. I do want to protect people's assets, but think of it this way. People are going in and abusing credit cards at Target. There could be a person that walks into Target today, did not have the authority to use that credit card. Are we expecting every person that walks into Target to be photographed and their picture sent to the state police? There is a little bit of a big brother issue here that I'm a little concerned about. So if that is going to be the case, I think we want to make sure that we're putting in some definite that says, you can hold these photos for a period of time, because it really is a legitimate commercial transaction. And for the 95, I'm going to hope, or more % of the transactions are law-abiding people that want to, sell their ukulele and get a loan. I don't know if I necessarily want to have under the aegis that it could come back to be a criminal thing. So I just want to raise a couple of those points and just see if we thought that through.
Counselor Lisi?
And the other point that I was going to make is I think that there was a second tier of information sharing, so it wasn't just with our chief of police. There was a state network and then like a regional network that the information would be shared with. And then how do we have jurisdiction over how long they get to keep that data? So, I mean, I think that there were a number of questions in the air that I mean, we had tabled it to get some more information.
Let me ask this suggestion too, is how about if we send into the database the pictures of the merchandise? I really don't have any problem with that whatsoever. But maybe at the pawnbroker level, the pictures of the actual customers be held by the pawnbroker. And if after a period, because that we do have some control over, and then we could say after a period of 1 year, the pawnbroker shall delete, the photos of if there's been no suspicion or anything of the customers, if that.
Yeah, I think it's worth getting the chief in because we had the state guy in, and, he seemed very much like invested in this program, and he was talking about the success, but I think to understand how it's going to practically work at the local level, it's worth having the chief in to talk about it.
Well, to the maker.
I'm ready when you're ready, if you want to recognize me.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
yeah, all right. So, because we're having a little colloquy here back and forth. Okay, well, first of all, just when somebody says, the big brother stuff, I love it because, when you're accused of a crime and you're brought into the police department, what happens there? You're fingerprinted and you're photographed. And guess how long that stays on a permanent record? Whether or not you're convicted, that's on permanent record till the end of time. So I love this stuff about, oh, geez, somebody's coming in and having their photograph taken. Imagine a big brother looking over. I mean, there's really little depth to that comment. But be that as it may, I guess I'm more interested in the merchandise itself being kept on record, and we have some sort of a way to track it. I think the only reason you take a photograph of somebody bringing in merchandise is for potential reasons that said merchandise was obtained illicitly, and that now you have not only the merchandise on camera, you also have the person bringing it in. That's not to say the person brought it in was the actual perpetrator, because there'd be further steps. There's no indication that person did anything was but an innocent third party or perhaps a straw person who was doing that. So whether or not that person is kept on a permanent record for 6 months, 30 days, 45 days, I really don't have any dog in that fight, and so I would be willing to agree to just about anything. As far as that goes, and who is a custodian of that photograph, I have no problem whether or not it's the police or the vendor. But I would suggest that the police would probably be the proper custodian for it, as opposed to the vendor. And then we would have control over the police as to, in our ordinance, whether or not they can maintain that photograph for 6 months or such a period of time as a police deems it's unnecessary to hold. I mean, you could keep it, you could leave it discretion of the police department, in my opinion. I don't really think it's a big brother type thing. Because, pawn shops, I respect all business people, and we had a good conversation with the gentleman who was here. To my knowledge, I think there are 3 pawn shops in Holyoke, but that I can think of, but there may be others. So it wasn't it's not a widespread type of an issue, but we thought when we filed this that it would just be just another little way for the city of Holyoke, just as we were talking about earlier, to my friend Kevin, we're talking, try to make Holyoke a little more modern. Well, this says, well, no longer are we going to have stuff on pads and in paper and in some sort of a book. Some sort of a logbook. This is to have it computerized so we can share information with other departments, with the state police, possibly with the FBI. And would only be used if there's some sort of go through the proper procedural steps to obtain it, so there's that.
Counselor Bartley, if I remember correctly, thank you, the businesses already have to take the photos, correct? They already are
The
doing
merchandise.
this.
Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with the merchandise. I think the concern is taking the photos of the people and moving on, and recognizing that citizens that walk in to make a commercial transaction are not people under arrest. Okay, I make a distinction between people that are coming in. There's a difference between people coming in cuffs into the back of the Hoyle Police Department and people that are just looking to, auction off their harmonica. You know, I mean, there's an obvious difference there. I don't have a reasonable expectation that my photo is gonna end up in some state police database because I wanna auction off, grandma's china that I inherited. Whereas you get yourself arrested, well, okay, then you're on permanent record forever. But, be that as it may, I think I'm more focusing on the people part. If that part's not in there, I have no problem, whatever, because I actually think it's helpful to take the pictures of the merchandise because the state police, say you're the victim of this crime, you're actually gonna be able to go through a database of photos of actual photos of potentially your stuff and say, scan all these pictures of, whatever, the stolen television, and does this one look like yours? A book is not gonna help you. You need a good description. And let's face it, this happens on eBay every day, right? People are photoing their merchandise and putting it up there all the time. I don't have any problem with that.
Thank you. Counselor Lisi?
Thanks. The last thing that I would suggest is, if we have to create an ordinance, perhaps Counselor Bartley and Kara and/or the police chief could get together and draft something for us to review instead of just, giving out parameters and being like, create something.
Well, Counselor McGivern.
Just 2 cents. This is a good law enforcement tool. I think that's what Counselor Bartley is proposing. And although I agree in Counselor Jordan's arguments, the importance of this is that our ordinance is outdated. It says a pawnbroker, a secondhand license holder that deals with precious metals, coins and whatnot, the sale and purchase of, has to have an open book. It doesn't say anything about pictures. Pictures are more, it makes more sense to take a picture for that person. It's actually easier to do than to actually do the open book these days. But, years ago, we got broken into on Beach Street, and they found my class ring at Joe's Jeweler. And I was able to get my class ring back. The perpetrator was not apprehended because he said his girlfriend found it in a tree belt walking down Suffolk Street. But, there was a little link and there was a little investigation. And that's a good friend of mine. Her house was just broken into, a city councilor in East Hampton. And she said the state police were going to the mall this past weekend because I'm not too sure. I don't remember voting on one, but she says there's at least 3 kiosks at the mall that deal with precious metal sale and purchase. And that's the difference. It's not just it's if someone's willing to buy from anyone that walks in with coins, jewelry, memorabilia like that, of a nature that is a quick sell, and if it was taken illegally from someone's home, off of someone, then this is just a tool to help prevent that. The resale, I agree with the language that, there shouldn't be a resale of any item for 30 days to allow law enforcement to get in there. And if this connects law enforcement electronically, 30 days may not even be necessary if they can look quickly when there's a B&E and the items taken are listed. Law enforcement, state police, local police can get on real quick the electronic database and start looking for these items. Identify the item, now go see who sold it.
Well, I'll make a motion to have Kara put into legal form for this, for the committee to review it. And then we can table it for now and just have Kara when she get, maybe in a month, Kara, a month or 2 or whatever. There's no rush. 2 months. Have it reviewed, have it, table this to sometime in February. Okay, yeah, so that we don't have to kill you. So why don't we do that?
Second.
All
right.
all in favor?
Aye.
So, pardon?
Nothing, I got in the habit of going all over.
So table for legal form.
Motion to take number 13 off the table.
Can we do
I was
23?
just looking to see if we had anything else. The poor Yem is still sitting here, and I'm thinking, I don't think you need to be here any longer. There is one more item, so let us, I'll
sure.
accept a motion to go out of order.
Sure, so moved. Second.
All in favor?
All right,
Okay, so we'll go to item 23, filed by Counselor Bresnahan, that DPW install appropriate signage stating local traffic only, no commercial vehicles on Lower Westfield Road from Whiting Farms Road to Holy Family and on Route 5 at the bottom of Lower Westfield Road. The neighborhood has seen an increase of commercial vehicles, trucks. It's probably partly from the correctional program.
This order would require an engineering study, and it would also require, the finding would have to be approved by the state master DOT.
Right.
And the key here is you gotta come up with alternative route, and that
Right.
could be difficult.
So would it be allowed?
oh,
Right,
To
to restrict it.
to come up with an alternative route.
Yes. Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so the alternative route would be to put the big trucks through somebody else's neighborhood.
Correct.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make a motion to give this leave to withdraw.
Second.
All in favor?
All right,
That's too main of a road.
I just don't see it.
I mean, it's,
How you gonna do
the
that?
intention's excellent, but
Probably buses that go down there too. I'm sorry, Councilman Givern,
No, it's just the sad part though is where these trucks are coming from. And they're coming from all the boxes, big companies in Westfield. And they should be going down Route 10, getting on a
And
turnpike.
taking the pike,
And
right.
taking the pike to where they're going. They don't want to do the turnpike because of the tolls and because it
Right.
takes them a little out of their way.
I hear you. Thank you very much, and sorry for the delay on
There's
that.
something to be
Thank
said
you.
for the fact they should come off exit 15, right? As opposed to the math, they could go math. I think what the intent of this is the road by the geriatric authority, right? So what they're saying is you should come off if you're coming from the Mass Pike, go up the route and come down 15. I think that's the point. There's alternative routes, but.
Oh, yeah, but these are cheaper. All right. So, I'll accept a motion to take up item 13.
Second.
All in favor?
I,
Ordered that section 2-34 of the ordinances be reviewed and amended as necessary to prevent any office of City Hall from closing early or closing during normal business hours. Now, obviously, Counselor Soto isn't here, but I believe his order relates to the additional closing days of City Hall.
No,
Yeah.
it had to do with the funeral that happened in the Board
Oh,
of
is that
Health.
what motivated it?
They closed the office so that the individuals in the office could attend the funeral.
So that may have been the intent of his order. So, other than,
Yeah, just in a related, but not, I haven't talked to Counselor Soto about this, but I did actually get one complaint from a citizen regarding during the inauguration, certain offices were closed, that they went in to do business at a particular office, and because the staff were all up watching the inauguration, there was no one left behind. You know, it's okay, someone's gotta be like, oh, we still gotta keep the government going, so for like an hour or two, or whatever it was, these couple departments were totally unopened at all, and so I did get a complaint from somebody on that, and, it's kind of a related topic. I believe this ordinance references that City Hall's open from 8:30 to 4:30, and, somebody's gotta be there at least to answer the phones, or if there's walk-in traffic or something,
right, and also on another related topic, when the City Hall has been closed for a whole day, Christmas Eve, day after Thanksgiving, things like that, it's publicly listed what days City Hall is closed. As a matter of
So we may have to,
public policy. So I mean, the intent of his order, I remember what you're describing, but there've been other things that have happened since. So really, the committee could use this language to consider whether we want to do anything with it.
I mean, at a
or-
minimum, department heads need to be reminded if there's funerals, civic events, whatever it is, they've got to keep their office open, even with a skeleton crew,
Right.
you know?
Or at least, I mean, I could see in the Board of Health situation, like, who do you leave behind? Who do you say can't go to the funeral? But, I mean, at least a note on the door that says, please go to
This office,
This
they'll
office.
Right.
cover us.
Or maybe,
make
you know, I think in that situation too, huh?
Oh, okay.
Well, that was
Why
gonna be
somebody
my point, is
covering?
why can't someone from another department
So,
help out for a few hours and sit in?
so,
Did they go over what if there was foot traffic though? Yeah,
Can't believe she passed away.
okay. Okay,
so, since
send a
this is
memo.
on that point and the other matters are of a different nature.
right.
I mean, I would entertain a motion that this is complied with if we've
I would
asked and answered the question.
I would say complied with, but I think we should also ask either Ryan or Bob Judge via Ryan to send out a memo as a reminder of some sort that in the event that your staff is unable to be present for any particular day or period of time during the day of work, that we need to figure out some avenue for calls and foot traffic to be
Well,
attended
we had this
to.
inauguration one, is it, you know,
It's a good
it
example.
was two different departments were closed for an hour or two period, you know? And somebody, a citizen walked in, and as, you know, as exciting as it was to be at the inauguration for us, maybe for them, they weren't so thrilled. And, they walked up to a door and it was locked, and they're like, hey, what the hell, you know? People are shooting in and out, coming from work or their lunch or whatever, and they need, you know, they need this work done.
So what is the pleasure of the committee?
What, just complied with, but we're gonna send a letter to department heads?
Yeah.
Reminding them of the ordinance?
Is that
Okay.
your motion?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. So we've dealt with 14 through 20, except I couldn't find a couple of, I couldn't
15,
find
I think we need to
15.
formally table if we're not going to take it up.
Let's see, let me just make sure I didn't miss it. We went out of order before you arrived, Counselor Jordan.
Oh, okay. 14's all set? You said?
14 was the only one we couldn't find a recommendation from the
Right,
Oh, okay.
handicap.
and it may be that we just don't have it back yet.
The other ones are already all set?
Yeah.
Okay,
So we may not have a recommendation and then it should just be tabled.
okay. Make a motion to just keep 14 on the table until we get a, excuse me, 15.
Yeah, because
Until we get
I
a
don't see it on a
recommendation.
third look.
Second.
On favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So we're up to what, 21?
21 and 22 is a package, please.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So item 21 was an order that the council consider amending Zone SC to allow for certain additional business types. Item 22 was an order that city create a shopping center zoning code designed for such large-scale districts, including but not limited to the Kmart Plaza, King Street, the South Street Plaza, et cetera. And just as a technical matter, in terms of reviewing the jacket and coordinating with Attorney Cunha regarding timetables, time limits for hearing recommendations and acting upon closed hearings, I've been informed that we cannot act on these without a whole new start.
I did see that email that said that the public hearing was closed on the 13th, but I remember taking this up in November, so I was just wondering if it was tabled or actually closed on the 13th of October. Did you check on that timeline? Because I know you expressed some uncertainty in the email as well.
Closed, and then Marcos had gone back to the planning board, and their minutes and did confirm that both bodies closed on October
13th.
13th.
So we can't really do anything with these.
We have to refile them. I mean, I really hope that for all the time that we spent going through those ordinances and the broad support that we were receiving from the business community around the, I guess, general intentions of these orders, that we're not going to let it just disappear, and that I would refile that and begin the process anew, and probably in an abbreviated form, since we are all informed and up to date on the matter.
And if I can just clarify, I don't think you have to refile them. I mean, the orders are still in committee. They just can't be acted on until you have a further hearing and report from the planning board, so.
Oh, so you just need to send it for a new hearing and a new report?
Right.
Oh, okay, so you
Right,
can still keep
because
these?
I would say so. I mean,
Well,
the order is still, it's just that by statute, the council, if the council doesn't
Okay.
make a decision within 90 days from the close of the hearing, so.
You gotta have another hearing.
Right. So
Okay.
the orders are still alive because you haven't
Okay.
taken any action.
just gotta have
but
a new
it's
hearing.
just- Yeah.
Okay,
But that does obviously require advertising and
Sure.
a joint hearing.
so make a motion that they stay tabled then, and then we'll have to have a decision whether or not we have another hearing and all that.
well, right, and we've got a lot of stuff already,
Well, I'll let you guys all,
yeah.
don't-
I still have to figure out the rest of the schedule.
Right.
I'm just a member.
Remember that.
Oh, boy, yeah,
That's why I call him counselor, not president.
that was on microphone too. That's good, good, so there'll be no dispute. Okay, so you want a motion to adjourn then?
Yes, I would.
Did we table it effectively?
Motion to keep
Well, we
21
didn't
and
take them
22.
off the table.
We did.
We never-
We did.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think.
That's
yes,
how we
we
started.
did.
Motion to table.
Table 21 and 22.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
And then motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good night, Kara.